Okay, so how do we live out this story of the Bible in our lives? Here around Wellspring, we talk about 4 life rhythms. Gather for worship, be a blessing, be a student, be a friend. We say, do those 4 things weekly, and you are on your way to living the Wellspring way of life. And really, the Wellspring way of life, we hope, is the Christ-centered way of life. And so if we look back at the storyline of the Bible, we had a saturation. This idea that we live with Christ at the center. That Christ is at the center of our lives, not just first in our lives. And so the idea here is that like my work, my family, my play, my recreation, right? Like all of what I do can be a manifestation of Christ in me. So Christ is at the center, flowing through all of these areas of my life. Now, around Wellspring, we want to give you some very practical handles to be able to live this way. And so we say each week do 4 things. Gather for worship, be a blessing, be a student, be a friend. Now, we want to be aware of, remember that at Sinai, we tend to say, because I live a certain way, therefore God will love me. This is law-based living, and it's not what we're shooting for. The law brings death. But when we live Christ-centered, empowered by the Spirit, we find life once again. And so we will not counteract sin in our lives by behaving better, but we will counteract sin in our lives by living Christ-centered. And so these are just a model as a reminder for you to center your life on Christ. So what we say is gather for worship. We say that first because it's the engine around which drives everything else. So if you're looking here at this picture, we might have an arrow pointed this way. And it starts here because gather for worship is pushing that arrow forward. And so gather for worship is where we gather with other believers around the word and sacrament of Jesus Christ, that we might hear the gospel proclaimed and celebrate the sacrament that seals our forgiveness. And so we gather for worship weekly because living Christ-centered requires that we sync up with people on a regular basis to remember why we're here and who called us together. Then we have be a blessing on that leading edge. So be a blessing is how we present ourselves to the world. We engage by blessing. We allow God's love to flow through us that we might be a manifestation of Jesus in the world. So when people encounter us, they encounter us first as blessing. So in our arrow, that's the tip of the arrow. That's the leading edge. We move forward into the world by blessing others. Then we say be a student. Be a student is up here at the top. Because we're thinking about anchoring our mind in Christ. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 12 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so we are not meant to turn off our brain. We're actually meant to remain curious, that we might be open to learning, that our mind might be renewed. And so we say that we should learn with curiosity. And when we share our knowledge, it should be with humility. We are seeking to be renewed by the transforming of our mind. So everywhere that God leads us, we remain curious. We're asking questions about how God works and where Jesus is working among us. And so this might look like reading the Bible, but it also could look like just asking the questions of the internet about who Jesus is and getting yourselves to some resources, discussing that in community to make sure you're not getting anything too wacky, but letting your curiosity run wild that you might discover more about who God is. And then we say that, and then our 4th rhythm is to be a friend. And we put this on the bottom because this is really like where the rubber meets the road. This is where our feet touch the ground, is in relationship. And so we're saying be a friend is always be developing relationships. Always be connecting with people, learning more about them and more about yourself in the process. And so this looks like grabbing a meal with somebody, having coffee, talking over something important. But it's really just about connection. We can't remember who we are as whole human beings unless we're connected to other human beings. And so again, these are not things you have to perform in order to be loved by God. It's just a little shorthand of how your life might look as the love of God begins to capture you. And so it's living life saturated with Christ at the center, that everything we do might be soaked with Him. This around Wellspring is our shorthand for how we give a picture of what that might look like. I'd love for you to explore this together with some other people you're talking to, or if you have questions, please get with me. I'd love to share more about how you can live a saturated life. Thanks.